Hello and welcome to today's episode for Gifted Awareness Week. As promised, it's an episode for all of our grandparents of gifted kids. Someone asked me recently, how do you tell family and grandparents that your kid is gifted? And it's a really great question. And I had been wanting to do an episode for a while with grandparents, for grandparents, bring them into this conversation because our extended families are so important in this day and age. We're also isolated. And, if we can all be on the same page, communicating, talking our way through this journey together, then that's just so much better for everyone. The kids, the parents, the grandparents, like we can all just kind of be on the journey together rather than separately. And so I rather impromptuly asked my mum if she would join me in a podcast. Kind of deliberately. I didn't want her overthinking it, but also sometimes you just got to do these things. And thankfully she's like, yeah. So while we were having a chat, it worked out really great because Pop came home and he joined in the conversation. And so what I've got is part 1 and part 2 of grandparenting gifted kids. And I think it's really great to have this conversation because in as much as it's about giftedness and gifted kids, it's also about parenting across the generations. And I think some of those things that we need to take into account when we're communicating and kind of on this journey together. So I really love these episodes. I hope that you enjoy them as well. Let me know. Do you want to hear more from Nana and Pop? Let me know if they're helpful and what you kind of took away from it and what you thought. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group where you can just subscribe at ourgiftedkids.com, and we would love for you to be a part of the conversation. So here's part 1, and part 2 will be out very, very shortly. Bye. Hi, I'm Sophia Elliott. As a parent of 3 gifted kids, I'm here to talk about all things gifted because I've been isolated and uncertain, and I felt like that parent. Then I found peace of mind, support, and my community. This podcast is about sharing that journey, actually parenting gifted kids, and connecting with advice and support. So we have everything we need for every member of our family to thrive. This is the Our Gifted Kid podcast. Welcome to today's podcast. We're here today to talk to our grandparents of gifted kids. And I'm here with a grandparent of a gifted kid. I would like to introduce Nana, my kid's Nana, my mum, who has kindly offered to join us in the podcast, which is to say, I just said 15 minutes ago, hey, Mum, do you want to do a podcast? And she didn't say no.
Might have.
Welcome. How are you feeling about that?
No, good.
Good.
I think grandparents, they need to get involved.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation. It's one I've been thinking about for a long time. It's like, because a lot of people will say, how do I tell my family? We've just, if my child's just been assessed, how do I have this conversation with the grandparents in the family? And it's an interesting question, and there's some complexity in that, because I think in having that conversation, what we need to acknowledge is how challenging it is to kind of accept and understand giftedness and neurodivergence for generations where it just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Do you know, like growing up.
Idea.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, growing up, for your generation, even mine, we just didn't have like giftedness, but also parenting was very much, children are seen and not heard.
Yeah.
You-
shamed into doing things.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of shame,
Control.
yeah, fear, Do you know, like stories about nuns and Catholic schools?
Yeah.
Sorry, not that I'm thinking on nuns and Catholic schools, but like that's, you know, if I'm thinking, yeah, if I think about the stories from your childhood and schooling that I remember, like I've got to say there's a lot of nasty nuns in those stories. Do you know, like
fear-based.
very fear-based.
Yeah.
A genuine lack of love and understanding.
Yeah. Genuine.
So then I think if we acknowledge how hard that was and what a different era that was, but then in the next breath kind of say, well, now you need to accept something that you've kind of never experienced. It's kind of going from, you know, we're asking you to kind of accept that something that wasn't real is now real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's like, I remember when Finn was diagnosed with giftedness, it's kind of like, what do we do? Well, what do we do? You know, like as if we have to do anything, you know, but it was, I remember it was quite confronting because, you know, we've got this kid that was obviously brilliant and, you know, would teach us things all the time with his, you know, can I tell you something? Can I tell you something? And then you had to be prepared for a half an hour, you know, lesson on something, which can be confronting because you're not, you know, he was talking about biology of bodies and science and atoms and things I'd never heard of. And like, there's a certain amount of, I can get that people would feel embarrassed maybe by that. Oh God, I know nothing about space, and this, you know, 4-year-old is all over it. Like, you know, I can see where maybe men would find that quite confronting as well. Yeah, so there was a lot of, and also I remember thinking, like, why are they teaching their kid that?
Yeah, like we had anything to do with it.
Why would they be teaching? I never forget thinking that. When he's lightly telling me about the human body in great detail, like, you know, what is wrong with these parents?
Oh, I love that because that's the thing, isn't it? People are like, there's just this assumption because, you know, there's that lack of understanding about what giftedness is, that it's kind of like, well, why have you spent all your time teaching your kid about that? And as a parent, and that's the irony. As a parent, you're sitting back, like your kids are leading. They're running off, reading books about atoms and space and biology, whatever. And it's not like there's no control over that as a parent. They're a runaway train.
Yeah.
And then but it's so unbelievable that the people around you naturally assume, well, you're teaching your kid that, because how could a child so young have any knowledge? Like, how would they even know that, right? Yeah. It's like this.
They must be pushy parents.
Yeah, right. God. Which is hilarious because, for me, that's hilarious because, you know, I had 3 kids all within 2 years of each other. Do you know, they're all so one and the other than the next. Like, I don't have time to be a pushy parent. I'm like just trying to get through the day. You know, the things that I should, you know, inverted, you know, air quotes there, should be doing, I'm not even quite managing. And then there's this perception that we must be hot housing this child because why would a 4 or 5-year-old know this stuff?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, there's definitely something wrong with the parents.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think one of the biggest challenges between a gifted child and the adults around them is the perception that the gifted child is rude and disrespectful. And because gifted kids can be very precocious with their knowledge. You know, they know a lot. They've got this very busy brain and they want to share it and they want to talk about it. And as an adult, getting that, you know, because a gifted kid will happily correct you if you're wrong. And it's not meant to be rude or disrespectful. It's just, I have this knowledge. I know it's correct. I'm sharing that knowledge because wouldn't you want to be correct? Do you know?
You've got it wrong.
Yeah. And that child might be 5 and you're 40, 50, 60, whatever. And it's kind of like, that can be really confronting and hard.
Yeah, well, it was quite scary. I remember thinking, okay, so what do we do as grandparents? And it is quite confronting, isn't it?
It is, because the reality is gifted kids do need support and accommodations at school and parenting and in life. So giftedness is a horrific word. I actually think the label itself is in no way helpful. And I've yet to come across a label that I feel like really articulates what this is well. Some countries will say high learning potential, but I also think that has a lot of problems, because what it is a brain that is wired differently to the majority of their same age peers. So if you've got a class of 100 kids, most kids in that class will be typical, like you, and it's like anything, you always have a majority, and then you have the outliers. And you will have those kids who are developmentally a bit challenged at that end, and then you will have those kids who are developmentally a bit more advanced. But the gifted kid is an outlier even further. So the way I kind of look at it is that I'm a visual person, so I like the bell curve. And I'll try and explain that without kind of needing people to go Google bell curve. But basically it says we've got the bulk of people in the middle. Then we have those people who are highly intelligent. So they're the kids at school who will get, mostly A's and B's. Like they get good grades, they achieve well and highly, but they're comfortable in that peer group, but they're just at the top of the peer group. Now, a lot of people think those kids are gifted kids, but they're not the gifted kids. They're the highly intelligent, high achieving kids at the top of that peer group. The gifted kids are even smaller number of kids who are outside of that box. Now, the gifted kids are in the top 10% in terms of IQ. That's a very common, that's our one consistent marker of giftedness. Kids will get a cognitive educational assessment, which is basically an IQ test. And sometimes there might be other assessments that go along with that to understand them a bit better. But basically that IQ test has different subtests within it, and it gives you an idea of how that child's brain works and what their IQ is like. So for example, gifted kids will typically, research shows, score very highly in verbal comprehension. So they'll often have really great vocab, and my youngest, I remember him being 2 and using the word literally correctly. And I know it because every time he said it, I would be like, was he using that correctly? Because I can't believe he's saying literally. And it was I've never heard him use that word in the wrong context. So gifted kids will have this vocabulary that just boggles the mind. And that's very common. They'll also be really good kind of like problem solvers. They may or may not have a specific strength, for example, in one area, and what is fairly stereotypical is the kid that's really good at maths or science. But also gifted kids can just be a generalist. So it's not that they have this one standout strength. It's just that they're across the board quite good at most things. And that's the kind of person I am. I've always kind of been across the board, good with most things. So there's this cohort of child that does not fit in the box because their IQ is so far removed from what is typical that it makes it very difficult to fit in to what is mainstream. And the higher that IQ gets, the harder it is, because the more extreme that individual gets, and the less likely it is that they're going to fit into any box anywhere. So you see a lot of kids with IQs in the 98th or the 99th percentile who homeschool because parents have just struggled to find a school that can cater for them. Because those kids, if they're made to sit in a classroom with their same age peers, so let's say this child is grade 4 age, they're really going to struggle. And research shows us that gifted kids can go through 80% of the school year without learning anything new. Yeah. So if you've ever had a job that has bored you senseless, and I have, like we've all been there, right? We've all had that job we remember, and it's kind of like bored us beyond what we could cope with. That's what school's like for these gifted kids. It's not that they're bored, it's
Toxic, really.
Oh, it's toxic, right? And it starts to affect their mental health.
Yeah.
And the problem is, we understand giftedness is this misconception that it's just the smart, high-achieving kids. And while gifted kids have high IQs, and that is obviously a real strength, the weakness is, the challenge is, they experience the world through this emotional lens. It's not just their IQ that is heightened, it's all of their senses and their emotions are heightened as well.
Yep.
And that makes it really hard to exist in the world as everyone else exists, because they're feeling things so much more deeply and intensely. They're reacting more deeply and intensely and in extreme ways. They, the fabric in their clothes annoys them, sound annoys them, light annoys them, tastes, they might eat this, but they might not eat that. And it can be really hard, I think, to have a child that just can't cope with those things, and days gone by, that would have been seen as just bad behavior, and then we're expecting, adults, parents, grandparents, family to just kind of understand that this child is not doing any of this stuff deliberately on purpose. It's the way their brain is wired.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that's the hardest thing. It's kind of like going, they're not behaving badly. They can't cope with these things.
And I think once you get that, when you have, the education, you've got to do a bit of reading yourself. Once you've kind of get that in your mind, that actually all you have to do is really accommodate them. You just have to love them. Mm-hmm. And with the food goes, like, okay, we have a buffet so that everyone's accommodated.
Yeah.
There's no, you'll only eat that. Everything's on the table, so they just choose what they want and hopefully they get fed. So it's not like you have to exert control over them, because they're just joyful. They're just brilliant. If you just, they're so challenged in a way, aren't they? Like, they have so many challenges. Remembering, and Lily, when she was little and she had the speech, no speech, and that was shocking. Like, it's not, people say, gifted, like it's some lottery you've won, but actually it's not the lottery you want to win, is it? Because there's all sorts, like Lily had, like, that was shocking. I remember just being like totally
Devastated.
What can we do, you know? And she was so smart though, like she'd get her communication around, I'll never forget the bricks story, the Nutrigrain. She wanted Nutrigrain for breakfast, but she couldn't talk. There was only a few letters that she could say. Yeah. And I remember, and we used to say, can you tell us a different way? Like, we can't hear. Like, we were the deafest grandparents ever. We can't hear. Say that again. And then we'd have to say, well, Lily, can you show us? And I remember she wanted Nutrigrain, and she was saying, we didn't have a clue what she was saying. And Mark said to her, well, darling, can you tell us a different way? So she went outside, she pointed to the bricks outside, and she went, bricks, like, okay, brick, Nutrigrain, you want Nutrigrain?
That's right, because we call them bricks.
Because we call them bricks. Yeah. For some reason they look like
they
bricks.
look like little bricks.
So she was, there was never any doubt that her brain was...
Yeah, and she was so persistent.
Yeah, and she was such a good communicator.
Yeah.
And, but that was shocking. As a grandparent, it's like, oh, my God, what can we do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you can't fix things, you kind of do have a bit of a meltdown.
Oh, hell yeah.
It does all become too difficult, and it's like, oh, my God, I can't. can't deal with that. Yeah, so there, as a grandparent, there are a lot of challenges. There's a lot of, really need to find out what it is, like the rule thing is interesting too, like, because they have beautiful hearts, but of course they're like anyone, they can react badly to things they can't control. And I think so you've just got to make it, when they visit, it's all about them. It's not about controlling them. It's all about just getting the best out of them, I think.
And I think adjusting expectations.
Absolutely.
So the big thing about gifted kids is they're asynchronous, which means, let's return to our grade 4 child. How old are they in grade 4? 10. I think they're 10 at grade 4. Anyway, let's say they're a 10-year-old. So that 10-year-old might be doing, I don't know, let's be extreme, grade 11 maths, grade 9 science, or capable, but 10-year-old English. They may be actually quite emotionally mature, but then their emotional regulation might actually be really challenging. So asynchronous means they're all over the place. And it can make it really hard to have expectations that are realistic for that child. So you couldn't just treat that child as a typical 10-year-old because there would be some expectations where they're capable of much more, but there would be some expectations where they're capable of less. So a big issue for gifted kids is executive function, which basically means it's that skill of just getting yourself kind of organised and managing in the world. So classic example is, please go get your shoes and socks on, do your hair and teeth and get ready for school, right? Seems pretty straightforward. We do it every single morning that we go to school. But for a gifted kid, first of all, I just gave them 4 instructions. Secondly, between getting shoes and socks on and brushing hair and teeth, there are books, there are toys, there are siblings. So it's kind of like, I'm going to get distracted by this book and quickly read a chapter. And I've forgotten that I have to put my shoes and socks on. And, and I'll remind again, and please put the Kindle down, pop your shoes and socks on. Okay, off they go and what was I doing? And so actually that expectation that they're just going to get themselves sorted in the morning is unrealistic. Even though kids their age, might be mostly capable of that, for this kid, it's not a realistic expectation. And if as a parent or a family member, we keep having this expectation over and over again, but that child is just not capable, well, then we're just going to end up in this scenario where we're constantly battling and expecting this child to do something that they just can't. It's just not realistic for them to do. Yeah. And that just is this cycle of awfulness, really.
You've just got to stop judging. Yeah. Stop judging and just love them. You just can't put it on them.
Yeah. Because there's also a lot of, it's called being twice exceptional.
Yeah.
So what the research shows is when your brain is a bit different, like being gifted, there's a good chance that there will be other differences. You've got a higher chance of having other things going on. So there's a high chance that gifted kids will also have ADHD or ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or dysgraphia, which has to do with challenges in writing, or dyscalculia, which is challenges around numbers, or dyslexia, which is challenges about words and reading. And so the myth is, you're gifted, you'll be fine in life, you don't need support, and you're gifted, therefore you couldn't possibly have any learning challenges.
Yeah.
But it's not the case. No. You can be gifted and have this high IQ and this different lived experience of the world, but still have those challenges.
Yeah.
But the reality is we need to kind of focus on those strengths.
Absolutely. But we have to arm ourselves with that knowledge as grandparents. It's not our job to control or, we have to educate ourselves. And our job is just to love them.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
You're welcome to join us.
Grandparenting gifted children. How do you find that, Mark? How do you find it?
The hardest thing for me to do was change my attitude to children, I had old-fashioned ideas, is what it was.
Yeah.
That's key, isn't it?
And it wasn't hard to do, but then it's hard to understand. You believe that the way that things used to be, and children have got to earn, you're taught to earn your right to speak, and taught not that everything's not just there for you, otherwise when you go to school you're going to be in trouble, or if you go, when you start work, or your parents die, and you're out by yourself and you think, well, wait there, all this stuff needs to be there, that stuff. But I think this, day and age, and I think it's the access to the information they got is changes what they've got to, they know what they've got to do to make to get along in life. I'm pretty sure of it.
So not so much parental control.
I don't know, I think the parents have got to control them as in, I think they need it a bit too, so they know that they're cared for. I think that's where a lot of people fall down,
You've got to have, still got to have clear boundaries.
You've got to have boundaries, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah,
you've got to have boundaries then, and they've got to respect the boundaries. And that, I think that's where the tough part is with parents that have, I hate to say it, haven't got the skills to do that. So the children take advantage of the less parenting, if you know what I mean, because they don't know what else to do.
They're in survival, aren't they?
They're in the survival mode, yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to get away with some of the, from them ideas. I mean, but I'm always open to everything. I mean, I'm just amazed that Geordie Soap's parenting, just totally blows me out of the water.
Just from great parents around us. But I think that's the thing. It's like, for me, boundaries are about ultimately safety.
Yeah.
Yep. So
And-
I was going to say that.
And the kids are knowing that we are, I'm going to say in control, but that's not quite the right word.
No.
It's like we've got things
guidance,
sorted, do you
yeah.
know? They're safe because as parents, we're doing the grown-up things.
Yeah.
And they don't have to worry about the grown-up things.
Yeah.
And they're safe.
Yeah.
And we keep reinforcing these boundaries so that they know that they're safe.
Yeah.
And it's the kids' job to push the boundaries because they're like, am I safe? I'm going to push it. They're exploring.
Yeah.
And it's our job as parents to kind of go, no, here's the boundary that's keeping you safe. And that makes them feel safe.
Yeah.
But within that, we try and give them freedom to be independent, to make decisions,
Well, they've got
to explore
thinking
their
for
big,
themselves.
yeah, that's right, to explore their interests and just, I think the big thing for me is not be afraid to be wrong. As a parent, I don't try to show my kids this mother that's never wrong.
No.
Do you know? I'll own it, and if I kind of am not having a great parenting moment, which happens sometimes, I'll just say to the kids, actually, mummy feels frustrated. I didn't handle that very well. Let's have another go. And that's actually, for me, stronger parenting than I am right, you will do this. I've got control and I will never be seen to be wrong or infallible or not, human
well,
kind of thing.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That's what parents, you don't do that. You don't say, be quiet, and then if they're still carrying on, you go and explain it to them where, back in the days I'd have been so they just sit out or get into your bedroom and stay there.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Because I found with my kids, because they're intelligent, thoughtful kids and they think about things. And if I say to them, look, just go do that, well, they'll be like, well, why? Do you know? But if I say to them, look, I need you to do X, Y, Z because we've got to get out of the house, one parent, 3 kids, we don't want to be late for the thing. I'm not kind of losing power by explaining what my constraints are. I'm just giving them the context of why I need them right now to put the book down and go put their shoes and socks on. And when they kind of understand the context, because they're thoughtful, intelligent people, they will comply. They will work with me.
Yeah.
Because they get it. And even as a 2-year-old, with Finn especially, if I explained things to him, right, we've got to go do this, we've got to do this, you know, and he would be like, okay. But if I just kind of said, right, do you know, it would be like, huh? Like, you know, so I just learnt quickly that I would get, you know, parenting would be easier if I just kind of included them in that conversation. So that was part 1 of Grandparenting Gifted Kids with Nana and Pop. What'd you think? There is part 2, will be out momentarily. I'm just going to release them on the same day. And I hope that you enjoy the journey that we take with Nana and Pop in these 2 episodes. I certainly did. I actually thought it was really great having these conversations, just deliberately sitting down and talking this through and really appreciating their points of view on it as well. And trying to share, hopefully for those grandparents or parents who are listening, some information about what it's all about along the way. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We've got a free Facebook group. You can subscribe at ourgiftedkids.com and you can enjoy the part 2 right now. See you soon. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode and it inspired you in some way, I'd love to hear about your biggest takeaway in the comments. For more episodes, you can subscribe, and to help others find our podcast, please leave a review. You can find show notes and more resources at ourgiftedkids.com and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. See you in the same place next week.